Imagine paying like $300 for a concert ticket.
Oh, yeah. That is an investment.
Right. You wait in a digital queue for hours. You coordinate all the outfits. You stand in the freezing rain outside the venue.
Sounds miserable already.
It is. And then when the band finally takes the stage and plays their set, it's just, well, it's just okay.
Yeah, that is the worst feeling.
But the thing is, today, a teenager wouldn't write a scathing multi-paragraph review about that experience. They wouldn't even complain about the rain, honestly.
No, they really wouldn't.
They would just use a single three-letter word to completely dismantle the entire night. Mid.
Mid. Yeah, it is incredibly brutal in its efficiency.
It really is.
You don't even need a full sentence to completely write off an event or a person or, a piece of media. Just one syllable does the heavy lifting.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today on our deep dive. Because internet slang, it doesn't just evolve anymore. It acts like an invasive species.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. It just takes over comment sections and real-world conversations almost overnight, leaving us all trying to catch up with the new vocabulary.
Which can be exhausting.
Totally. So our mission today is to unpack this specific tiny word that has completely taken over. We're going to uncover a hidden 20-year origin story that is going to completely change how you hear this word.
It's a really surprising journey, too.
It is. And whether you spend hours scrolling on social media or you just, occasionally overhear conversations in a local coffee shop, you have absolutely heard something described as mid. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so to really grasp the sheer whiplash of how mid is used as a weapon today, we need to strip away the internet context and look at its original functional DNA.
Right, the baseline.
Exactly. For centuries, this word existed in a state of absolute unremarkable neutrality. It was purely locational or temporal.
Which is funny because I love looking at the sheer volume of everyday uses we have for this prefix. It just paints a picture of how boring this word used to be.
Oh, it was incredibly boring. Like, think about your everyday life. We talk about things happening in midair. We fly over the mid-Atlantic.
Students stress over their midterms.
Right. We celebrate midsummer and we freeze in midwinter.
Yeah, the utility of the prefix is its precision. It simply places you in the center of a timeline or a physical space.
It's literally everywhere. You work in Midtown, or maybe you live out in the Midlands. You schedule a meeting midweek. You grab a coffee mid-afternoon. You stay up until midnight. You stop midway through a project. Or, you buy a sports car because you're going through a midlife crisis.
Right, right. And what's fascinating here is the complete lack of a value judgment in every single one of those examples.
There's zero judgment.
Zero.
Yeah.
Historically, as an adjective or a prefix, mid simply and neutrally implies being in the middle of something. It tells you where you are in space or in time without telling you how to feel about it.
Yeah.
And if you trace the etymology, mid and middle are distant linguistic cousins. They share the same neutral family tree. They act exactly like GPS coordinates or calendar markers. Like if I tell you we are mid-flight, I'm not giving you a one-star review of the airline's terrible customer service.
No, you're just stating a fact.
Exactly. I'm literally just informing you that we are currently in the air.
You also see this in other structural cousins, words that imply middleness, like midst, midriff, and a mid.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like a midriff isn't a bad stomach. It's simply the anatomical center of the body.
Makes sense.
And midnight isn't an inherently terrible hour of the evening. It is just the astronomical middle of the night. The word was a perfectly flat line.
Which brings up the massive glaring question here. How does a totally neutral GPS coordinate mutate into a cutting cultural critique?
It's quite the jump.
It is. How do we get from saying midwinter to calling a multi-million-dollar blockbuster movie mid?
Well, the shift from neutral geography to a descriptor of quality is a relatively recent phenomenon. If you trace the vernacular shifts, you start to see this linguistic mutation taking hold around the early 2010s. The word mid began detaching from physical space. Instead of meaning you were in the middle of a room, it started being used to imply that a thing itself was of not particularly impressive quality or standing.
So it moved from describing where something is to describing what something is.
Exactly. In this evolved state, calling something mid meant it was just okay. It wasn't great. But crucially, it wasn't necessarily atrocious either.
Right.
It existed perfectly in the dead center of a quality spectrum.
See, I have to push back on this definition of it meaning just okay, though.
Oh, how so?
Because that purely analytical definition doesn't fully capture the emotional weight of the insult out in the wild. Like, think about it. If mid really just means okay or average, why does it feel like such a harsh targeted strike?
That's a fair point.
Right. If someone tells me my outfit is okay, I might just shrug and go about my day. But if they tell me my outfit is mid, I am immediately going back to my closet to change clothes. Just okay. Shouldn't hurt that much.
Yeah, and that is the defining psychological twist of the modern usage. What's fascinating here is that the true sting of mid isn't about objective badness. It is entirely about the mechanics of a letdown.
A letdown.
Yeah, it relies on the presence of unfulfilled potential.
Oh, so it's about the drop. It's the distance between what you thought you were getting and what you actually got.
Precisely. You expected a phenomenal experience. You anticipated greatness, but reality delivered something distinctly average.
Ugh, yeah.
That vast hollow space between your high expectation and the mediocre reality.
That gap.
Yes, that specific gap of disappointment, that is exactly where mid lives.
That perfectly explains the concert ticket scenario from earlier. Or, like, think about going to a massively hyped-up new restaurant in your city.
Oh, that's a great example.
You know the ones? You've been trying to get a reservation for 6 months. Food influencers are raving about it online.
The lighting is perfect.
The lighting is perfect. The menu looks incredible. You finally sit down, take your first bite, and the food is, well, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's just fine.
Which is arguably worse than it being terrible.
It is entirely worse. Because if the food was raw or burned, it's a disaster. But it's a memorable disaster.
Right, it's an event.
It's a funny story you tell your friends at a bar later. But if the food is just fine, it stings in this frustrating, almost exhausting way because of the dashed expectations. You invested time, money, and emotion into an experience that gave you absolutely nothing remarkable in return.
The expectation is the required fuel for the insult. Like if you pull up to a cheap 24-hour fast food drive-thru at 2 in the morning, you expect highly average, slightly stale food.
Of course.
When you receive that average food, you wouldn't call it mid because your expectations were already perfectly aligned with reality.
That makes so much sense.
But the word is weaponized specifically against things that boldly promised greatness but delivered mediocrity.
And there's another fascinating layer to how this word is weaponized, which revolves around contrarianism. It is incredibly effective as a tool to completely puncture someone else's enthusiasm.
Oh, yeah. It's the ultimate subjective veto.
It really is.
It functions as a conversational stop sign. You use it to playfully, or sometimes entirely seriously, dismiss popular consensus.
Right. Think about a friend who comes to you practically vibrating with excitement over their absolute favorite film of the year.
We all have that friend.
They are giving you a 20-minute monologue about the cinematography, the acting, the deep philosophical themes. They think it's an undeniable masterpiece.
Yeah.
And you just look at them, wait a beat, and say, honestly, it's mid at best.
It is devastating because it strips away the dignity of a debate.
Yeah.
By calling a critically acclaimed piece of art mid, you aren't even validating it enough to argue about its flaws. You aren't saying it's spectacularly bad, which would at least mean it made an impact.
Right.
You are condemning it to the realm of the utterly unremarkable. You are saying it wasn't even worth your emotional energy to dislike it.
From a purely linguistic standpoint, it feels like a really neat, tidy evolution. You look at words like mediocre or middling, which we already know are distant etymological cousins of middle, and you just assume that the internet did what the internet always does.
Yeah, abbreviate everything.
Exactly. You assume someone just chopped the word mediocre in half to save time typing, and boom, we have mid.
It presents itself as a perfectly logical linguistic shortcut. It makes complete sense that a generation raised on texting would abbreviate middle of the road down to 3 letters.
Right.
But while that logical leap tracks perfectly on paper, the actual documented historical birthplace of this slang has absolutely nothing to do with shortening the word mediocre.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the true origin story of this word is wild. The modern slang use of mid, like the exact same vocabulary that teenagers are using right now on algorithmic platforms to review pop albums and video games,
Yeah.
it actually emerged directly from early 2000s drug culture.
It is a phenomenal example of how language bubbles up from the underground.
It really is.
If we trace the chronological pipeline, it illuminates the mechanics of how subcultures invent words purely out of necessity, and how those words eventually escape their original containers.
So take me back to the start of the timeline. How does a neutral GPS coordinate become narcotics slang?
Well, looking back to the early 2000s, Within the specific underground language of the cannabis trade, there was a need to clearly communicate pricing and quality tiers.
Okay, that makes sense.
Cannabis that wasn't top shelf, but also wasn't the absolute lowest quality, it needed a functional identifier.
Oh.
So the products sitting directly in the center of the quality spectrum became widely known as mid-grade.
Oh, wow. That makes perfect economic sense. It's a literal description of inventory within a gray market.
Exactly.
They took the neutral locational prefix we talked about, mid, and applied it to product quality, mid-grade. It wasn't an insult yet. It was just a menu item.
Yeah, it was purely functional slang serving a specific subculture. But, language rarely stays static, especially when a word serves a very useful purpose. Fast forward a decade to the early 2010s, and we see the first major mutation. The subculture begins to drop the grade suffix entirely. It simply becomes mid.
Okay.
And more importantly, this is when the definition softens from a specific product tier into that general descriptor of not particularly impressive quality.
But at this point in the 2010s, it's still relatively contained, right? It's simmering in the background and maybe bleeding into adjacent communities like hip-hop or skater culture.
Yeah.
But my grandmother isn't using it yet.
No, definitely not your grandmother.
So what is the mechanism that pushes it over the edge into the mainstream vocabulary?
The late 2010s mark the critical tipping point where the term completely severs its ties to drug culture. When slang diffuses, it often happens because a highly specific word perfectly captures a universal feeling that the mainstream language lacks a good term for.
Ah, I see.
People outside of the cannabis culture realized that mid was an incredibly efficient way to describe anything that was unimpressive.
It's the linguistic equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. Suddenly, it's not just about mid-grade cannabis. It's a mid-grade music festival.
Yeah.
It's a mid-grade pair of sneakers. It's a mid-grade date. The jump is seamless because the concept of an underwhelming experience is universal.
The context falls away, but the utility remains. By the late 2010s, it was falling into wide, general use to describe food, movies, and social events that fell short of expectations.
Which sets the stage for the final massive explosion. The rocket fuel that propels this word into the stratosphere. Because today, mid isn't just popular. It is arguably the defining insult of an entire generation.
Oh, absolutely.
And the engine driving that ubiquity is widespread use on TikTok.
The algorithmic acceleration of TikTok changed the trajectory of the word completely. Platforms that reward short, punchy, high-engagement content are the perfect breeding ground for efficient slang.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is just mind-boggling. Like, think about a 15-year-old kid sitting in their bedroom right now leaving a comment on a TikTok video that a highly anticipated Marvel movie is mid.
Yeah.
They are executing a flawless, cutting cultural critique using the exact vocabulary forged by the 2000s narcotics trade,
Right.
and they have absolutely no idea. They just know it's the perfect word for the job.
It perfectly illustrates the life cycle of modern slang. It almost never comes from the top down.
Really?
Yeah. Grammarians and academics don't invent the words that define a generation. Slang originates in highly specific, often marginalized or underground communities who need new words to describe their reality.
Wow.
It took nearly 2 decades for mid to travel from an underground pricing tier to become the definitive global shorthand for mediocre.
It's literally a 20-year journey from a bag of weed to a TikTok comment section.
Yep.
It speaks volumes about the power of the letdown concept, though. That specific subculture identified a feeling, the reality of something not being as good as you hoped, and the rest of the culture eventually realized, hey, we need a word for that feeling too.
Because the pain of dashed expectations connects us all. We all know what it feels like to anticipate excellence and receive average. The internet simply adopted the most efficient vessel for that specific flavor of disappointment.
It is the ultimate expression of being fundamentally underwhelmed. To say something is terrible requires passion, energy, and anger. To say something is mid requires nothing but profound apathy.
That is so true.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the incredible linguistic journey we've unpacked today with you. We started with a word that was completely devoid of judgment, a sterile, literal marker of time and space. Midwinter, midtown, midair.
A word that only existed to serve as a factual coordinate.
Right. And from those sterile roots, we tracked a bizarre 20-year pipeline. We saw it drafted by early 2000s cannabis culture to describe mid-grade inventory. We watched it mutate over a decade, dropping its suffix and transforming into a broader term for unimpressive quality. We witnessed it escape its subculture in the late 2010s to critique food, movies, and music.
And then the algorithm took over.
Exactly. We saw it get strapped to the algorithmic rocket ship of TikTok, becoming the ultimate weaponized insult for a generation highly sensitive to hype.
And you now understand the deep mechanics of that specific disappointment.
Exactly. The next time you are sitting in a coffee shop or scrolling through your own feed and you hear someone call a beloved album or a hyped-up restaurant mid, you aren't just hearing a random slang word.
No, not at all.
You are hearing the ghost of the early 2000s living inside a modern critique. It's a highly targeted assessment of a letdown, backed by decades of linguistic evolution.
Once you see the hidden history of the words we use every day, it completely changes how you listen to casual conversation. And looking at this entire evolution, specifically the mechanics of the letdown, that dangerous gap between expectation and reality, and the word's massive recent explosion on platforms like TikTok, this raises an important question, a provocative thought to leave you with as we wrap up our deep dive today.
I always love a lingering question. What do you have for us?
Well, we established that mid is the resulting feeling when something falls short of expectations, like when you expected greatness and got mediocrity.
Right.
And we know its use has absolutely skyrocketed recently on algorithmic platforms. So we have to ask ourselves, does the sudden, overwhelming popularity of this specific word point to a deeper structural issue in the world we are living in right now?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because in our modern algorithm-driven landscape, every single thing is marketed as the best ever. Every 30-second video promises to blow your mind. Every new product is pitched as a life changer.
Every new song is the song of the summer.
Exactly. Are we constantly being set up with impossibly high expectations by these digital hype machines, leaving us uniquely vulnerable to this specific hollow disappointment of mid?
Wow. Are we just living in an era of engineered letdowns? Because if the algorithm hypes everything as a 10 out of 10, then by definition, reality is almost always going to feel like a 5. And when reality constantly feels like a 5, an entire generation suddenly needs a 3-letter word to process that constant disappointment.
The digital environment created the necessity for the word to explode.
That is a lot to chew on the next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling. And it brings us right back to our original mission today. Words are not static.
They really aren't.
The dictionary isn't carved in stone. It is constantly being molded by the anxieties, the subcultures, and the algorithms of the people using it. Right now, the culture is feeling let down by the hype, and they found the perfect 20-year-old tool to express it.
Perfectly said.
That's all for today's deep dive. Keep listening, keep questioning everything you hear, and we will catch you next time.